in the ranks of the 16th Irish Division. And indeed, even after the Easter Rising, which was a rising which took place in Dublin, but without any great outrage. The men who fought at the post office were superb. There was no outrage. There were people killed, soldier against soldier, as they thought, but there was no outrage at all. No unnecessary massacre or anything that is usually an attribute of war. And even in France in 1916, at the time of the Easter Rising, those people of Republican persuasion were not persuaded to rebel themselves, but stayed on to do their job. And people such as Tom Barry, then, when they did get home, joined the IRA. So they were persuaded within their own minds and morality to finish the job that they had come to. People like Professor Tom Kettle and the great poet Francis Lettich. The Easter Rising, of course, took place in Easter 1916. And in July of that year, on the first day of July, the anniversary of the Battle of the Boyne, which was fought on the 1st of July 1690, the Ulster men were were put in the centre of the line. And you can think what you can about this, but they were put in the worst part of the line. You can see that today. The rise and hill of the Schwaben Redoubt, which was immensely fortified. The 36th Ulster were placed in Thiepval Wood to advance against the Schwaben Redoubt. And you can think about that one, why they were put in that position. As it turned out, because they were from here, they had thought the whole thing out themselves. They knew how to advance. A lot of them went out early, stayed in the potholes and made dugouts of them, and then advanced. And they reached the 5th German line, whereas everyone around them collapsed. It meant that the enfusillade of machine guns on each side eventually caused them huge problems, and they lost 5,500 men. One of the finest displays of human courage ever in the history of warfare. And of course they had to retreat, but they were the only group who actually did reach their objectives, and their objectives were the worst objectives they could possibly see. In Thiepval Wood was a man who was brought up from reserve after the first day of July, in which William was killed. William's body was never found. And he's now one of the declared missing in action. That was all they said about him whenever they wrote back home that he was missing in action, to his mother Lizzie. And his name appears on the Thiepval Memorial, 15A, William Sloan, Royal Irish Rifles. His mother Lizzie refused to believe that he was killed, and she kept the door of Roseneath Cottage open until she died in 1932. She said that William would come home. And the only other child, of course, being Lila, who became Lila Hamilton. Lila took over the Roseneath Cottage, and I knew Lila because I apparently am the image of William Sloan, and that's really why a lot of what I have done has developed over the years. She actually thought I was. I think she had gone a wee bit sort of funny at the end of her life. But she actually did think at some stage, when I delivered the Belfast Telegraph, that I was William. I delivered the Belfast Telegraph on Hall Street, which is named after the Orange one. 4 Hall Street was the home of Danny O'Neill, the artist. I visited him as a little boy, and one of his friends whom I met was a man called Gerard, and his paintings are in this, they're shown in this, Gerard Dillon. And another man, George Campbell, who all stayed as wee arts come in our village, but that's a digression. William then was killed on the first day of July. At Lewes, the 16th Irish Division were fighting, and they were brought up to the front of the Somme. And they were put into action in September of 1916. And they fought at the battles of Ganchi and Guillemot, two little villages. At Ganchi was killed Tom Kettle, one of the great intellectuals of Ireland. And the loss really was enormous to Ireland, the loss of Tom Kettle. Brought up from reserve into Thiepval Wood was a man called J.R.R. Tolkien. J.R. Tolkien was a member of the Lancashire Fusiliers, one group of which was known as the Salford Pals. The first Salford Pals were on the right side of the 36th Ulster Division on the 1st of July. The history of the Salford Pals reads, Salford Pals, raised 1914, just completely destroyed 1st of July 1916, which caused a lot of problems for the 36 since the German machine guns then wiped out by enfilade the sides. The Germans, for whatever you think about the Germans are a soldierly people. To wipe out thousands of people on the spot like that is not really what the Germans thought the war was all about. The Germans fired so much, and it's recorded really in the Prussian Museum, and the materials coming out now, where they thought these people were immensely courageous. They thought that they were so immensely courageous, the Ulster men, that they stopped firing their machine guns. The problem really that the 16th Irish had at Guillemot and Ganchi was that the Germans at Guillemot and Ganchi were the best soldiers that had been brought up by the Germans to defend Ganchi and Guillemot at all costs. One's reminded of Iwo Jima with the Japanese. They were to fight, literally, to the last man. One of the men who fought at Guillemot was called Ernst Junger. Ernst Junger was one of the greatest of all infantry soldiers throughout the whole war. And he wrote his memoirs because he survived for some miraculous reason when you read his story. And the suffering of the Germans at Guillemot was enormous as he lost all his men and all his friends, every single one. And he wrote this book called Storm of Steel. And it's probably the finest book written by an infantry officer in the whole of the First World War. William Sloane died, but so did the large element of the 16th Irish Division at Guillemot and Ganchi. But they lost well over 4,500 men, which often goes by the board, since in Ireland at the time it didn't become sort of the right thing really to discuss these old soldiers, even though when many of the Republicans who fought in the First World War did get back to Ireland, they joined the IRA. And they made the best soldiers of the IRA because they were highly trained. But anyway, Guillemot and Ganchi then was the nationalist battle of the Somme. At the end of the First World War, it was thought that in Ulster that there should be a memorial raised to the men of Ulster for what they had done. And so the first memorial in the whole Western Front was built, and it is called Le Tour de l'Ulster, the Ulster Tower, or Helen's Tower. The reason why it's called Helen's Tower is that in Clandyboy, outside Bangor, there exists a tower, Helen's Tower. That tower was first created as a famine relief project by Lord Dufferin, who was the Viceroy of India, Governor-General of Canada. He almost made Canada. And he was the ambassador to Paris at the time of 1895, when that last great aristocrat cabinet took place and when my granny was born. Just to follow my granny's story to the end, really, Granny was immensely annoyed about William's death. She used to visit Helen's Tower, as a child, as I did. And with Aunt Hannah, she travelled across to Ardeer in Ayrshire, where there was a secret dynamite factory built by Alfred Nobel for making detonators for bombs and shells. And she joined that with Aunt Hannah, and they made detonators. And they used to say about my granny, because she got prizes for it, she was the best bomb maker in Britain. Granny then, stayed in Scotland, married a Scottish soldier called Robert Kerr, who's my grandfather. He was very left-wing, My granny was left-wing. Labour, Scottish Labour. Grandfather was even more left-wing. He was a Keir Hardie man through and through, because Keir Hardie had been born in Cumnock, which was just down the road from where they lived. He was the great hero, was Keir Hardie. My grandfather became a communist. Granny didn't like it, and they tell the story, which is apocryphal, that she hit him over the head with a frying pan, that he suffered brain damage, and after that he just voted Conservative. But that's probably a wee apocryphal part. Anyway, Helen's Tower started in 1851, because although he's in Karl Marx's Capital as representing landlordism, which Karl Marx, of course, did not like at all, he's actually mentioned Lord Dufferin in Marx's Capital. He did a famine relief project, and he gave his land over to what is generally known as the peasantry, of which I am one, an Irish peasant, and he gave it over later to the 36th Ulster Division, the Belfast Brigade of the 36th Ulster Division, when they were training. So the Belfast Brigade, of course, who formed the core of the 36th Ulster Division and lost the most men. Of the 200,000 who fought from Ireland, 100,000 approximately from the north, 100,000 from the south. In terms of casualties, about 35,000 men from Ireland died, 20,000 of whom were from the north, the bulk of whom were from Belfast. So they trained around Helen's Tower. Helen's Tower was finished in 1867, and it became a memorial to the mother of Lord Dufferin. He's called Dufferin in Ava because he did dirty dealings actually in the Kingdom of Ava when they took it over in Burma. That was really the only really dirty thing that he maybe ever did. But anyway, they gave him the name Ava because of that, Dufferin and Ava. Dufferin, of course, Dufferin is Old Gaelic, it's a region of Down. But anyway, This was the last great vision, as it were, that these young men, William, 19 years of age, saw before they left for France. So when it was decided by the authorities here in Ulster, the Parliament as it developed in Belfast at Stormont, that they would create this memorial as a replica of Helen's Tower. So it's a replica, more or less a replica. It's a very beautiful replica. And I think everyone from here should see it at least once. In Helen's Tower in Clandyboy outside Bangor, there's an inscription by Alfred Lord Tennyson, which is a poem written for Helen Lady Dufferin. Helen Lady Dufferin, the mother, was a lady of great literary talent, being the granddaughter of Richard Sheridan, the poet and dramatist. And she wrote The Irish Immigrant, which in fact is Dr. Paisley's favourite poem, as it was Cardinal O'Fee's. Not sure if it was Andy Terry's, but certainly it was the favourite poem of Tomás O'Fee and Dr. Paisley, now Lord Bansight. So if there is something that you might remember. Anyway, The Irish Immigrant. She died of cancer of the breast and had to receive opiates, which were used in the form of heroin, morphine. And she brought all the great poets of the day, since she was a poetess, to Helen's Tower to have soirees. Alfred Lord Tennyson was one, Robert Browning was another, the Duke of Argyll, who was a poet, was another, several of them. And the tablets in gold are written in the original Helen's Tower, in gold. Alfred Lord Tennyson's reads, Helen's Tower, here I stand, dominant over sea and land. Son's love built me, and I hold mother's love in lettered gold. In France, at Thiepval, the inscription is round the memorial chamber. Helen's Tower, here I stand, dominant over sea and land. Son's love built me, and I hold Ulster's love in lettered gold. Now, it's dedicated to the men of the 36th Ulster Division. Should actually be men and women, because all the nursing corps and all were part of that. But also to their comrades in arms in other regiments. So it's a general memorial. At Guillemont, they raised a Celtic cross. And at Messines, when the two, at Weizkata, near Messines, after the Battle of Messines in 1917, they raised a similar Celtic cross. And there's another Celtic cross to the other division that we looked to, which was formed really without any reference to UVF or National Volunteers, and that's the 10th Irish Division, of which Ledditch suffered in Gallipoli. My grandfather, Robert, loved horses, and he went to Gallipoli, and they said, stand forward anybody who likes horses. And he stood forward. He ended up leading a mule train, up the heights against the Turks. Now, he wasn't that fussed about not liking the Turks. It was just Turks or ordinary working people to him that he was asked to fight against. So he wasn't that fussed about that. After all, we were invading the Turkish homeland, But he did not like Winston Churchill. To the day he died, my grandfather said naughty words against Winston Churchill, who of course was sent then to rectify the situation at Plug Street in Flanders, and started to rise up again within the system. Anyway, in 1984 or 5, I asked the Reverend Dr. Paisley, who was MP, European MP, if he could help us with the Ulster Tower at Thiepval, because we went there. I asked him to go on the way back from France through a youth employment scheme on the Springfield Road. Well, originally Crumlin Road, Ainsworth Avenue, and then Crumlin Road, and then Springfield Road, cross-community venture. We went with young people from the Falls Road, and we went with people from the Shankill and East Belfast, and also from Inchicore and Tallaght and Dublin. And we brought them in this bus to various sites of interest throughout Europe. And on the way back home to Cali, I said, could we not stop at the Ulster Tower? Now, it was derelict, and the young people were appalled. It was derelict because there was a man called Adolf Hitler who actually had fought with great bravery and distinction in the First World War in the Somme area. And when the Germans invaded France, he got his picture taken outside the Ulster Tower, and one of his men carved a big swastika on the battlements. So we thought that what we should do was refurbish the tower through help of Dr. Paisley. Dr. Paisley at the press conference said that this was for nationalists and for unionists, and that was a significant point. And so, with the help of the young people, and of course the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, and of course the European community who gave the money, we refurbished the Ulster Tower, and so it stands. And in 1989 we rededicated it with the help of Princess Alice. The reason why we asked Princess Alice was because she came to Belfast after the Blitz with the Duke of Gloucester, went to East Belfast, Shankill, North Belfast, all round, and she was a wonderful woman, and we met her. And I asked her if she would become president of a new organisation called the Somme Association. The Somme Association then came into being in 1990. Dr. Paisley was very fond of it. We asked President Michael East to come there to the Somme Centre to meet Dr. Paisley, because she had an interest in the First World War, having helped to develop the Irish Peace Tower at Messines, although that sector was actually a New Zealand sector. And so we became very great friends with Mary McAleese and with Martin, her husband, and we still do. And so they met together to talk about the First World War, which she had a great influence over. And out of that influence, of course, things started to change in the Irish Republic, and Island Bridge and so forth became more acceptable, and we understood about the feelings in the South which were developing and had been there, and we understood that and just let it all gradually come through. And so it has. And the result of that then was the fact that the Queen was able to visit, and it was important to us that the Queen would visit the National Shrine first before she went to Island Bridge, because that's where she was, to recognise the people who had fought in the Irish War of Independence as much as those who had fought in the First World War in the British Army. And that really is the story, more or less, to date. The only thing was that although the Ulster Tower was meant to be a tower for not only the 36th Ulster Division, but their comrades in arms, it didn't specifically mention the 16th Irish Division or the 10th Irish Division. So at Gailmont, we asked the Gailmont Church is the Church of St. Patrick at Gailmont, which is really a strange thing to have the Church of St. Patrick at Gailmont. And it was derelict, just like the Ulster Tower. So we got Protestant pews from two Protestant churches, and we took out the old pews, which hadn't been used for a long time, due to, various religious feeling in France. There's one priest to about 20 parishes now. But anyway, we put in, and then we asked the Bishop of Amiens to rededicate this church to the 16th Irish Division. And so we brought over councillors from Northern Ireland, and the senior councillor was Mayor Diver of the Social Democratic and Labour Party from the city of what used to be called Derry, but I think is now called Stoke City. And he rededicated the church And strangely enough, 2 DUP mayors were on each side of him, and in the back row was filled with orange men. The reason why they were in the back row was that in case a thunderbolt struck during this high mass, that they would be able to get out quickly. So they were placed in the back. We'll not name them, but they're still very prominent within that movement. And I think that was a very important thing. But also, I felt that in recognising the 16th Irish, and now they have their shrine, just the French of a shrine, a big church shrine at Lorette, that there was nothing about the Germans. We've had our sensitivities in the Somme Association. First of all, during a long period of our history, we weren't allowed to ask the South for ministerial representation. Mary Hanavan, we eventually got Mary Hanavan over from the Fianna Fáil party. Lovely lady. We brought her with the Duke of Gloucester. And I spoke in Irish, at the ceremony, as I did at the Somme. So I speak in Irish, I speak in French, and I speak in English. I added in Ulster Scots a wee bit, and I had a wee bit of German, but I got a lot of complaints about putting in German. Didn't get any complaints about Irish, not even the soldiers' song at Guillemont, which we played. No problem whatsoever with that. But there was certain sensitivity still about the Germans. And we suggested that some German school children lay a wreath at the main ceremony, at Thiepval. Unfortunately, after the children had laid the wreaths, the local French took away the wreaths the next day and burned them. Anyway, what we thought was that we should rename 2 of the streets in Guillemont, one after the 16th Irish, which is called 16th Irish Street, and I opened it, and there's a picture of me, not looking as drawn as I usually do, pretty alert. And then we got another street through the European community named after Ernst Junger, the soldier that wrote Storm of Steel before it came on. The other person that we remember is Harold Macmillan, who was one of the officers at the battles of Guillemont, who was wounded several times. And out of his mentality came his tenureship as Premier of the British government. I mentioned early on, and I'll wind up now, Tolkien had come into Thiepval Wood. And in Thiepval Wood, Tolkien had the first ideas of the development of the epic saga, which was become known as the Lord of the Rings. Now, he wrote in a part of what's called the Silmarillion, a poem. He was asked if he actually wrote the Lord of the Rings in Thiepval Wood, and he says, no, I was too busy looking after my men to be writing anything. Tolkien had a great problem. Tolkien was an expert in German literature. And the Germans, of course, German regiments had very strong associations with the British regiments, particularly the Lancashire Fusiliers, formed under King William of Orange themselves, just like the 27th of Foot became the Royal Inniskillings. He had great problems because all his friends were German. In fact, he acted as an interpreter for German prisoners, but he lost all his friends. Not only did he lose his German friends, but he lost his friends from college. Gilson was killed at La Pucelle, at the great mine of La Pucelle, leading his men on the first day of July in the Battle of the Somme. His other friends were killed, and he basically left the war more or less with no friends at all, either German or English or Irish. In 1917 there arrived at the front a friend of James Craig called Clive Staples Lewis. Clive Staples Lewis again lost all his friends in the First World War. Tolkien suffered from trench fever, a rickettsial virus condition called trench fever, and so he missed the latter part of the war. C.S. Lewis also developed trench fever, but recovered and was sent back to the front. Professor Kettle was killed. Lettich was killed. So he lost a lot of those great literary figures. But when he went to Oxford, he met up, Tolkien says, met up with C.S. Lewis. They became great friends. The only problem that C.S. Lewis had, because he wrote back to his father to tell him, the only problem he has is that there was two problems divided them. One was that Tolkien was a linguist, whereas C.S. Lewis was literature, Scottish literature, as it were. He wrote all about Scotch. And they hated each other, you know. The other lesser problem was, as he wrote, that Tolkien was a papist and he was of the Protestant tradition. But they seem to have got over all that, mostly the fact one being a linguist and the other being a literature man, and they became great friends, and they formed, along with others, a group called the Inklings. And out of the Inklings developed some of the great literature of our time, most popular anyway. The Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, and the Narnia cycle. And if you note within these stories, there's mass movement of men, big armies fighting each other. It's the Somme. There are bodies all over the place in marshes, just like they were in the mud, of France and Flanders. But through it all shines the Hobbit, the ordinary person, rural usually, coming from a rural environment and thrown into a war not of their making, and fighting through that war and becoming victorious. So the Lord of the Rings and the Narnia cycle have a direct relationship to what we're talking about, the Battle of the Somme. The main theme of this Solon's Academy is to show that there's a complexity to history. And I think the development of the Maze project is quite appropriate in that we can park a lot of this history. We should never deny history, because if you deny history, you just relive it. But it is much more complex than often is presented. And that's the reason that we formed our Solon's Academy. And we house our great chairman, Liam Logan, who will lead us forward into the future with grace and aplomb and really, really good style. Thank you very much.